In the gospel today, we read from St. Matthew's gospel, and we read a parable that should be very familiar to us. The parable of the landowner going to hire people to work in his vineyard. And as we read this parable, whenever we look at the gospel, many times, very often, whenever we look at it at first glance, we see things that kind of jump out at us, kind of the norm, the familiar things. But if we look at it a little bit deeper, we see things that are very important to us understanding what Jesus is actually trying to tell us, especially when he's speaking in parables. And that's what we have today. Because at first glance, Jesus tells his disciple this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. So Jesus is explaining to us what the kingdom of heaven is like. The kingdom of heaven is like this landowner who goes and hires laborers for the vineyard. And we see that the landowner goes out and he hires laborers at 6 o'clock in the morning. And when he goes at 6 o'clock in the morning, he hires all the laborers, all the people he's going to need to work in his vineyard for that day. Well, then the landowner is walking through the marketplace at 9 o'clock in the morning, and he goes and he hires some people that are just standing around idly. He says, "Why are you standing here?" They said, "Because no one has hired us." So he hires them. He says, "Go work in the vineyard for the day, and I'll pay you a just wage." And then he hires people at noon. He goes back at 3 o'clock. He goes back at 5 o'clock. And in the ancient world, the workday is from 6 a.m. until 6 p.m. It's a 12-hour workday. And so when he hires those people at 5 o'clock p.m., they're only expecting 1/12 of one denarius. A denarius is a coin in the ancient world, and that's the daily wage. In our world, what would they get? If they worked 1 hour, they're probably minimum wage workers. They make $7. Why are they even going? Well, whenever we look at this gospel parable, I want to break these people into two different groups. We have what I would call like the morning workers, the people who sign on at the 6 o'clock a.m. mark, at the 9 a.m. mark. And then we have all the afternoon workers, the 12, 3, and 5 o'clock p.m. people. Well, those morning workers, they go, they're standing around in the morning, they're waiting for a landowner to come and hire them. And those morning workers, in a very kind of practical sense, they show up every day. They wake up and they go to get hired. And why do people work in the ancient world? People in the ancient world, they don't work so that they can go buy or build a bigger house. They don't work so that they can have a nicer vehicle or toy, or they don't work to live more comfortably. The reason that people in the ancient world go to work is they go to work so that they can put food on the table for their wife and for their children for tomorrow. So in a very practical sense, like this is before the days of refrigerators and freezers, obviously. So every day they get off of work at 6 o'clock and they go to the market and they buy, bread, milk, fish for tomorrow morning so that they can feed their children. This is kind of the daily routine. So if these people don't get hired today, what does that mean? It means that in a very real way, they're not going to have money to buy groceries this afternoon for tomorrow. So that's a big deal. Well, what does it mean? It means that these people who wake up and they go to the market every day and they hope to get hired. They get hired at 6 o'clock a.m. Whew. We're going to have money whenever we get off of work today to go buy groceries for tomorrow. They get hired at 9 o'clock. Whew. We're going to have money to go buy groceries when we get off of work for tomorrow. After the 9 o'clock crew, you can't really expect that many landowners to still be picking up people to work for just half a day. When the landowner comes through at noon, there's still people standing around and he picks up a couple. After that, they're really starting to sweat. What am I going to do? I'm not going to have money to buy groceries for tomorrow. 3 o'clock rolls around. There's still people sitting around that don't get hired. Each one of these people, in a practical way, they're getting more and more and more nervous because what are they thinking while they're standing around in the marketplace because they haven't been hired? How am I going to feed my children for tomorrow? If we look at these two groups in a spiritual sense, what is Jesus trying to tell us in the parable? Jesus is clearly referring to what it means to live in the kingdom of heaven here on earth. We call that the church. And then also, what does it mean to get into, to be received into the kingdom of heaven, God's eternal kingdom in heaven? So he's telling us how we are to live our lives while here as members of the church in order to be able to go into the kingdom of heaven. Obviously, very basic. When we call ourselves followers of the Lord, there's certain things that we do. The first is we come to Mass on Sundays, every Sunday. The second is we go to confession once a year. The third is we try to live by the 10 Commandments. Those are kind of like the 3 basic principles for us to call ourselves disciples or followers of the Lord. Well, as we look at this, and we're classifying 2 different groups, the morning workers and the people who sign on in the afternoon. Those morning workers are probably like many of us. The morning workers are the people who were baptized as Catholics, grew up in an environment where you went to church with your family, followed the Lord, tried to live a good Christian life. And that's what you've done from maybe when you were very little as an infant all the way your entire lives. Or maybe you're more like the 9 o'clock crew, where we look and we say, you know what? I've decided that this is what I want to do with my life. This is how I want to live my life. Around the time I was getting confirmed, or I was getting ready to get married, or maybe baptizing my first child in my 20s. Those would be like the 9 o'clock crew. And then we still have the noon, the 3 o'clock, and the 5 o'clock crew. So those are people that halfway through their life, at 40 or 50 years old, decided that I need to start being a follower of the Lord. This God thing matters. Maybe a little bit later, maybe in your 50s or 60s, maybe in your 70s or 80s, or on your deathbed, you decide that I need to follow the Lord. And the way in which we oftentimes approach these 2 groups is from our own mindset. Okay? So if we're part of the 6 o'clock crew, we've been going to church since we were little kids, a lot of times we don't think that it's fair that these other people can enter into heaven. For 50 years, they were terrible people. They stole from people. They cheated people. They had affairs and committed the sin of adultery. They did all these bad things. Why is it fair? Why is it just that they get to enter into the kingdom of heaven? Or maybe we should approach it from the second group of people. Because the second group of people in the gospel today that are in the marketplace and they get hired on by the Lord. They get hired on by the landowner who represents the Lord. As they get hired on by the landowner, what do you think? Do you think that they criticized the people in the first group, the 6 a.m. crowd? Do you think that they were bitter towards them? No. A lot of times, the way these people respond is they're thankful for the generosity and for the mercy of the landowner. That landowner doesn't need any more workers. The Lord doesn't need me to be a disciple, to be a follower. But what does He continue to do? The Lord continues to reach out, to seek after me, to try to draw me or pull me back to Himself. These are the 2 groups in the gospel today. But I want to look at a third group. So whenever Jesus comes into the world 2,000 years ago, there's these 2 groups. But I would argue that whenever He leaves the world, He leaves a third group. And the third group, and this is where I was going when I started at the beginning, the fact that a lot of times there's something underneath the surface that we got to dig a little deeper to find. The third group is referenced in the first line. You probably missed it whenever I read out the first line earlier. I've read this gospel for years. I've never thought about there being a third group. And I saw it in something I read while preparing for the homily this week. Jesus told His disciples this parable. The kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out at dawn to hire laborers for his vineyard. The third group is the laborers. And this is where I want to make the distinction. Whenever the landowner comes to hire people, who is he looking to hire? The landowner is looking to hire laborers in the vineyard. He's not looking to hire freeloaders. He's not looking to hire people that are only going to work whenever he walks around and makes his round. He's looking to hire people that are going to work from the time he hires them until they knock off at 6 o'clock. He's looking to hire people that are going to work, whether he's watching them over their shoulders to make sure that they're picking grapes and making wine, or whether he's not even around. He's looking to hire people who are going to work as laborers. He's not looking to hire people who are just going to take up space, who are just going to suck up oxygen, consume food and water, and just take up space and not really do anything productive. But whenever God comes to hire us, and I was thinking about this in relation to our parishes this week. Whenever God comes to hire us as a disciple of the Lord, what is God looking to hire? God is looking to hire laborers in the vineyard. He's not looking to hire people in the vineyard. He's not looking to hire freeloaders. He's not looking to hire people that aren't following Him from Monday morning until Saturday evening. He's looking to hire laborers. And this is where I'm going with this. Not looking to criticize anybody, but the reality is, like, as I look at parish life, A lot of times in the parish, 95% of the work is done by 5% of the people. And I was kind of looking, I think that's a very real reality in the United States for Catholicism. How would I look at this? Well, there's a couple different ways that I was kind of trying to test it. A lot of times, we just started the CCD year. Here at St. Rose, here at St. Joseph's. A lot of times, whenever we go to CCD and we get ready for the upcoming CCD years, we have a couple of teachers that need to step down for whatever reason, and we probably retain about 70% of our teachers year to year. That's standard across all parishes. Well, if we're only looking for 30% of new teachers, that might be 3 to 5 new teachers for the year. A lot of times, it's very difficult to find 3 new teachers out of 2 parishes that have 1,800 families listed. About 900, 1,000 people that come to Mass on the weekend across the 4 Masses. Let's think about something else. Upcoming, what are some big events we have coming up in the life of the parishes? We have the Griefs Memorial Mass that we do on All Souls Day every year. And then we also have the Advent Giving Tree. And the Memorial Mass takes a lot of work. That's the Mass where we invite everybody who's lost a loved one in the past year. So that's usually inviting about 60 to 70 families between the 2 parishes. The Memorial Mass is basically put on by a very small handful of people who prepare the program, who reach out to all the families, who get the pictures from the families, who prep for the reception we have after. We're talking about 1,800 families between the 2 parishes, and we literally have 3 or 4 people pitching in for the Mass and a handful more to put on the reception. The Advent Giving Tree that we do every year. We put the tree out, we put those ornaments on it. And we ask people to buy presents for families or children who financially they can't afford to have presents. And every year I kind of watch it. And this is how the Advent Giving Tree usually goes. First weekend we have it, a lot of people will take 1 ornament. Second weekend we have a couple more people. And we still have about 2 or 3 weeks until the deadline. And as we get closer and closer to the deadline, I watch those ornaments on that tree. Just to see what's going to happen. Are they all going to get picked? Whatever's going to happen. And as we get to the very end, it's a very interesting thing. Because I'll always figure, and I kind of by now have figured out who those people are. And they're going to walk up to the tree when nobody's looking, and they're going to pull off the rest of those ornaments. And they might pull 5 or 10 ornaments, stuff them into their purse, stuff them in their pockets. And they're going to take care of it. We have 1,800 families. It shouldn't require somebody to go buy 10, 12 Christmas gifts for those little boys and girls to have Christmas gifts. I was thinking about something else. The Adoration Chapel. A tremendous testament to our community that we have an Adoration Chapel that's open from 4 a.m. to midnight 6 days a week. That's amazing for a town this size. But the reality is we have 1,800 families. And I was looking at the Adoration Chapel recently, looking at the cars that I see coming in and out, the people coming in and out. And there are some people in our community, and they're never going to tell you who it is, that have as many as 8, 10, 12 hours a week. Some days they're going in there for 3, 4 hours at a time. And why is that? That's because 95% of the work is being done by 5% of the parishes. Well, as I'm looking at this, when Jesus comes into the world 2,000 years ago, there's very clearly 2 groups. There's the morning laborers, there's the afternoon laborers. Those morning laborers signed on from the very beginning. And today we would interpret that to mean signing on to be a follower of the Lord. The afternoon laborers are the people that sign on later in life. And there's a difference between these 2 groups. But the difference today, when Jesus exits the world 2,000 years ago, and he goes and he ascends back to the Father in heaven, the difference today is not between the first and the second group. The difference today is whether, if you're a member of the first group, let's say you've been coming to church your entire life, or you're a member of the second group, whether or not you're also a member of the third group. Whether or not I'm actually a laborer in the vineyard. Or are we kind of on cruise control? Are we more concerned with, coming to Mass, doing our due diligence, walking out, and we're done until next week? Because I would argue that's a big difference between being just a member of the first or the second group, or whether or not we're a member of the third group. And so today I want to challenge you. As we look at the upcoming year, I kind of always classify the parish year the same as the school year. We get revved up in August, we kind of finish up in June with most of the stuff, most of our events. As we come to the upcoming year, whenever we have things coming up, are we as a parish community, St. Rose of Lima, St. Joseph's, as our 2 parishes, are we going to step up? Or is our idea of being a laborer in the vineyard, somebody asked for my help with this, but I'm too busy, but somebody else is going to take care of it? Because that kind of shows, it's the litmus test to see whether or not we're ready to be laborers in the vineyard. So my prayer for this year is the reality that as we come and we decide to follow the Lord, as we come and on a daily basis we're trying to grow closer to the Lord, as we come, what are we trying to do? We're trying to be laborers for the Lord. We're trying to put the Lord first in our life so that we can grow closer to Him by working for His glory. Amen.